High blood pressure is not a disease. This is something I've been saying since 2014. And the reason why it's so important to understand that high blood pressure is not a disease is because it leads you to miss the actual value in knowing and actually caring about your blood pressure reading. Not only that, it also leads you down the path of doing things to decrease your blood pressure that really doesn't have a correlation with overall health improvement and well-being. In this video, I'm going to explain to you how insulin resistance actually causes high blood pressure and how most people who have high blood pressure are actually insulin resistant. Not only am I going to make that connection, I'm going to explain to you what you need to do in order to reverse insulin resistance, which will also cause your blood pressure to decrease. All right, stay tuned. What's going on, family? This is your brother, Edward Williams, licensed physician assistant and founder and creator of Health by Any Means Necessary. And I want to welcome you to our channel where we talk about all things Black health improvement, fasting, insulin resistance, and men's health. So if you're new around here, go ahead, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and be sure to share this video with anyone that you feel will benefit from the information that I'm putting out here. All right. So in this video, I'm going to be explaining how insulin resistance actually causes high blood pressure. Now, before we get into the conversation about how it increases blood pressure, we need to understand some very basic things about insulin itself. So, two things that you need to know. Most people, when they think about insulin, they always think about glucose. And I understand why that happens. It's because when most people are even exposed to insulin or insulin resistance, it always has something to do with glucose and blood sugar. Completely understand why most people would think that. But what you need to understand is that insulin deals with so many other aspects of your physiology and also your anatomy. And so two things that you need to understand about insulin. One, insulin is a storage hormone, meaning that it helps the body store nutrients. And so we're talking about storing protein / amino acids. We're talking about storing carbohydrates / glucose. Of course, this is what you most likely already know. We're talking about storing fat and fatty acids, but we're also talking about storing nutrients such as sodium and water. Yes, water is a nutrient. In fact, it may be one of the most important nutrients. And you know, I don't like playing that game of most important, but insulin plays a huge role in the storage of water. So that's the first thing you need to understand about insulin, is that it is a storage hormone. Okay. The next thing you need to understand about insulin is that it is an anabolic hormone. Anabolic means to build up. It means to cause growth. And in fact, insulin used to be a hormone that bodybuilders were inject back in the days. Well, I mean, they still do it now. Of course, it's supposed to be illegal, but it was something that was heavily promoted in the bodybuilding community, decades ago, where insulin would cause the increase in muscle cells, also known as hypertrophy or hypertrophy. So those are the two things we need to understand before we get into this conversation about high blood pressure. Insulin is a storage hormone, and insulin is also an anabolic hormone. Okay. Now, before we go into the next part, it's going to be very important that we go into this next part of the conversation wearing the lens of what I call APR. APR stands for appropriate physiological response. We have to understand that just because the body is responding a certain way doesn't mean that that is a dysfunction. In many cases, the body is responding in an appropriate way based on the signals that we're giving it. But it is our job, our duty to understand that response and why it's responding that way. So we're going to talk about the appropriate response of insulin from a physiological standpoint and how it increases your blood pressure. So once again, you need to understand that most people who are hypertensive have high insulin levels. In fact, it is almost impossible to have high insulin levels and normal blood pressure. With that being said, let's talk about how insulin affects the body from a physiological standpoint. And the first thing we need to talk about is insulin and its relationship to sodium and water. Insulin causes increase in water retention. And the way it does that is by acting on the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands are small glands that sit on top of your kidneys. Uh, the adrenal glands are said to be the body's pharmacy because it secretes so many hormones. In the case of sodium retention, we're specifically talking about a hormone called aldosterone. Aldosterone plays a crucial role as pertains to the water sodium balance in the body. Whenever aldosterone is increased or secreted by the adrenal glands that are sitting on top of your kidneys, it's going to act on the kidneys to retain sodium. It's going to make the kidneys retain sodium. And what you need to understand about the relationship between sodium and water is that wherever sodium goes, water flows. Remember that. Wherever sodium goes, water flows. And so an increase in aldosterone will stop or decrease the excretion of sodium out of the kidneys, because usually in a normal state, the kidneys will actually excrete excess sodium, which will also cause the fluid to follow behind it, because wherever sodium goes, fluid flows. But in the state of an increased amount of aldosterone, this is going to cause the kidneys to hold on to that sodium, and it's going to put that sodium back into the bloodstream. Once again, wherever sodium goes, water is going to flow. And so with the retention of that sodium back into the bloodstream, the circulatory system, you're now going to have more water, more fluid into the actual circulatory system. That alone is going to increase the volume of fluid circulating in your circulatory system. That alone is going to increase the pressure, because if you have a closed system that already has a certain amount of fluid in it and you now increase it, the pressure inside of that closed system will have to increase. It's going to increase. And so that alone is one of the ways that high insulin levels will now create high aldosterone levels, which will cause sodium retention, which will cause water to follow that sodium into the circulatory system, which will now turn out to increase the blood pressure in your circulatory system. That's the first way. So the next way that high insulin levels will increase your blood pressure is by increasing your blood vessel size. So once again, we talked about how insulin will store nutrients, and it's also going to act as an anabolic hormone. It is an anabolic hormone. It's going to cause things to increase in size, also known as hypertrophy. So it's going to cause a growth in your cells, which is fine, except in the state of abnormal, chronically elevated insulin levels. When you look at your blood vessels have multiple layers. But when we're talking about the innermost lining, we're talking about the endothelium. And you all know my work on endothelium. And if you're unfamiliar with my work on the endothelium, make sure you check out my free course called The Truth About High Blood Pressure. The endothelium is so important. You've heard me make the statement that the endothelium is the largest organ in the body. I know, doesn't sound like it can be true, but it is. Not only is it the largest organ in the body, it is a endocrine hormone because it secretes, it is an endocrine organ because it secretes hormone. That hormone in this case being nitric oxide, and that is something that we're going to come back to later. I'm going to put up a picture of the endothelium and its relation to your vessels, and you're going to see where the endothelium is lining the vessels. Now you see the size of the cells of the endothelium in the vessels. You also see the diameter of your blood vessels. Well, once again, insulin is an anabolic hormone, meaning that it's going to cause cells to grow whenever there is a high amount. And so in the case of the endothelium, excess insulin coming through the blood vessels will act on the endothelium and increase the size of the endothelium. Increasing the size of the endothelium, also known as hypertrophy, will now decrease the diameter of your blood vessels. When you decrease the diameter of your blood vessels, you're going to decrease the amount of space that the blood has to flow. That alone will also cause an increase in blood pressure. I hope that makes sense. And I'll just kind of use my hand for a little bit to kind of, show you what I'm talking about. But if this is the normal diameter of a blood vessel and you have high amounts of insulin flowing through the blood vessel, your blood vessel will go from being this size in diameter to now becoming more narrow, and that is going to cause an increase in your blood vessel. That decrease in your diameter may seem like a small amount, but you need to understand that the endothelium is the largest organ in the body. We're talking about 60,000 miles of blood vessel. To give you an example of just how huge that is, planet Earth is 25 miles in circumference. The blood vessels in your body together is 60,000 miles in length. That means that you have something in your body, your blood vessels, your circulatory system, that can wrap around planet Earth 2.5 times around. And so a small decrease in the diameter, although it may be small to you, makes a world of difference when it comes to your circulatory system. And having constant elevated levels of insulin is going to increase the size of the endothelium, which is going to decrease the diameter in your circulatory system, your blood vessels. So that is another way how high insulin levels will increase your blood pressure. All right, the next way that high insulin levels will lead to high blood pressure is because it won't allow your blood vessels to dilate properly. So once again, we're talking about dilation. I'll use my hand again. So you can kind of think of this as being the normal size of a blood vessel. All right, you see the diameter, you see the circumference. Now I'm going to cause vasoconstriction. Constriction means to decrease the diameter and the circumference of the blood vessel. And so now you have less space in order for the blood to flow. This is something that would be useful in the times of the need for high blood pressure when you're sympathetically activated. If you're in a fight or flight state, when you need to run as fast as possible, when you need to fight, when you need to swing, then that increase or that decrease in the circumference and vasoconstriction will be beneficial. And so that is vasoconstriction. Vasodilation means that we're increasing the diameter and the circumference, also meaning that we're going to increase the space that the blood has to flow. And so it's going to go from this to this. And so that's vasodilation. All right. Now, in the state of high insulin levels, chronically elevated insulin levels is going to completely cause that normal process to become dysfunctional. And once again, this is something that has to happen. I told you that the endothelium is an organ. I know. It is the largest organ. I know. It's also an endocrine organ. Endocrine means that it actually secretes hormone. The hormone in this case that the endothelium is secreting is called nitric oxide, NO2. And nitric oxide is a strong vasodilator, meaning that it is very strong when it comes to opening up your blood vessels, widening your blood vessels. In fact, people who are having chest pain or angina, you can rub nitroglycerin, a gel, on their chest, and it will stop that chest pain just like that because it forces the blood vessels to dilate. And because angina is being caused by a decrease in blood flow to the heart, to the cells in the heart, which is causing that intense pain. The gel will now open those blood vessels up extremely fast and allow more blood flow to those cells, which will decrease that chest pain, that angina. So that is the normal function. Your endothelium is supposed to secrete nitric oxide whenever there's a need for the blood vessels to become wider. And believe it or not, insulin actually helps your endothelium secrete nitric oxide. Now, this sounds like it doesn't make sense because I'm showing you how high insulin levels actually increase blood pressure, but I'm also saying at the same time that high insulin levels, or I'm saying insulin, will actually help your endothelium secrete nitric oxide. Here's the caveat. Your body's not designed to be exposed to high insulin levels for a chronic amount of time, a long period of time. And your body has to protect itself. So I told you how insulin has an anabolic effect on the cells in your body, leading to hypertrophy, cell growth. Well, your body's intelligent, it's going to adapt. So if you have all of that insulin flowing through your arteries, your blood vessels, day in and day out, the endothelium will start to increase in size. But the body has to protect itself, because if that endothelium continues to increase in size and continues to decrease the diameter, you can see how eventually that's going to cause a problem. And so because we don't want that problem, your body will now have to make an intelligent decision and become resistant to the insulin signals that are being given to the endothelium. And so your endothelium actually becomes insulin resistant to some level so that it does not become overstimulated by the insulin. The reason why that decreases the nitric oxide production is because insulin, something that was once increasing the production of nitric oxide, will now become numb or will become resistant to the signal of the insulin to the endothelium, and that nitric oxide production, which was once had a vasodilatory effect on the blood vessel, will be blunted, because you can't have both. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't receive the signal from insulin to increase the nitric oxide and not receive the signal to grow. And so the body has to make an intelligent decision, and it just has to become resistant to insulin in general. And so the endothelium will become resistant to insulin in general, and that will also decrease the nitric oxide production by the endothelium. And the next way that high insulin levels will now increase your blood pressure is because of the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. So I always talk to you all about the autonomic nervous system. The autonomic nervous system, you can kind of think of this as the subconscious or the unconscious workings of the body. This is the part of the nervous system that takes action without you having to consciously think about it or having to consciously do it by yourself on your own. So right now I'm blinking my eyes on purpose. But if you watch this video, I was blinking my eyes the whole entire time, not bucking them, blinking them. And at no time did I consciously think about it. Why? Because my autonomic nervous system was doing that on purpose. My autonomic nervous system is also regulating my heart rate. It's regulating my breathing. These are all things, well, actually, these are things that are going on in the background that are crucial to me doing what I'm doing right now, and crucial to us all doing what we're doing right now. However, inside of the autonomic nervous system, you have two systems. You have the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is also known as rest, digest, feed, and breed. This is a state of being more calm, relaxed. You're not as stressed. This is where digestion can take place. This is where that's the best state for you to eat in. It's also the best state for you to breed in as well, because you have less stress hormones. You're just going to be in a healthier state. But you can't always be laid back. At some point, you may need to turn up. And that's where the sympathetic system comes into play. The sympathetic system is also known as fight or flight. The sympathetic system is known to get you ready to go, ready to fight or ready to get out of there. So in the case of needing to actually flee from a scene or defend yourself, well, you got to think about the parts of your body that you're going to be using the most in those states, which are going to be your legs and your arms. And you think about just how big your legs are. Your legs are going to need an extreme amount of blood flow if you're going to be defending yourself or fleeing from the scene. Same thing with your arms. But not only that, in that state, you're going to need to be getting blood to those areas as fast as possible. Therefore, you're going to need to increase the blood pressure. You're going to decrease the blood flow to the areas that are not really relevant in that stressed out situation, which is going to be your digestive system, your reproductive system, and also certain parts of your thought process will be decreased as well. Because if you're in a state where you're fighting for your life, you're probably not thinking about your stock investments. You're probably not thinking about things 10, 20 years from right now. You are locked into the now. And that is the power of the sympathetic system. It locks you into the now, which of course you can see can be a problem. On the parasympathetic side, when you're more calm, you're relaxed, well, that puts you in a state of thinking more long term. Okay, so I'm rambling a little bit too much about the sympathetic versus parasympathetic. The point of me talking about the sympathetic nervous system is because high insulin levels activates or puts you more in the sympathetic state of being. And once again, kind of think of that sympathetic system as being higher intention. Everything's higher intention as it pertains to what you would need to defend yourself. And so that is going to cause your blood vessels to be more tense in certain areas of the body, i.e., the areas where you need the blood to flow, such as your arms, your legs, just in case you got to get out of there. And it's also going to cause the redirecting of blood from your digestive system, not completely, of course, because you still need blood flow, but it's going to be allocating the most of the blood to those vital parts of your body that are needed to defend yourself. And you can see how this will be a problem when it's activated predominantly for the most part of the day. And that's what many of us are walking around in. We're walking around in a state of being sympathetically activated or sympathetically dominant. And that will cause an increase in tension on your blood vessels in general. And that alone will also increase your blood pressure. And that is also influenced by high insulin levels. High insulin levels will push you more into that sympathetic system. And I hope that makes sense to you. The next way that high insulin levels increases your blood pressure is not so much through insulin, but more so via glucose. High glucose levels will cause high insulin levels because the high insulin needs to respond to the high glucose. But high glucose will increase the viscosity of your blood. When we're talking about viscosity, we're talking about the thickness of fluid. And so in order to kind of give you an example, and this is a dramatic example, but it helps you to understand what I'm talking about. When we're looking at viscosity, the thickness of fluid, let's look at water. Water would be something that has a very low viscosity. It's thin, it moves very easy. However, if we look at something like syrup or molasses, it has a very high viscosity. It's very thick, and it moves slow. Now, if we were to think about trying to drink water through a straw versus drinking water through, oil or syrup through a straw, you can see that the water would go through the straw very easy. However, the syrup or the oil or the molasses is going to be very slow. And it's also going to take a great deal of effort to move that syrup or molasses through that straw. Well, increased viscosity can be seen as the same thing when it comes to your circulatory system. When you have high levels of glucose, that is going to increase the viscosity of your blood. It's going to make your blood thicker. The reason why I'm putting this together with the insulin is because the high insulin will now also play a part of that viscosity, because you have higher viscosity, meaning that more pressure will be needed to push that blood around. But also with that, you have that high amount of insulin mixed into the high glucose, mixed into the high viscosity, which will also cause clumping of your blood platelets. And altogether, this really creates a dangerous situation for your body as a whole. Now, once again, high insulin level itself directly may not increase the viscosity, but you will usually find high insulin levels in someone who has high viscosity because the high insulin levels are responding to the glucose. And so I hope that part makes sense to you as well. All right, so we just went through several ways that high insulin will increase your blood pressure. We talked about how high insulin levels will cause sodium retention via acting on the adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidneys, which will then increase the amount of aldosterone being secreted from the adrenal glands, which will then act on your kidneys, which will then retain sodium, which will then cause water to follow that sodium back into the circulatory system, which will increase the blood pressure. We then spoke about how high insulin levels will cause hypertrophy. It will cause cells to grow. And so in that case, we're talking about the endothelium, which is the largest organ in the body, which is also an endocrine hormone endocrine organ because it secretes a hormone called nitric oxide. But in this case, high insulin levels will cause hypertrophy to the endothelium, which will decrease the diameter in your uh, arteries, your blood vessels, and that alone is going to cause high blood pressure. Then we spoke about how that overstimulation of the endothelium is going to decrease this excretion of or secretion of the nitric oxide, which is a powerful vasodilator. However, that effect will now be blunted because of the overstimulation of insulin caused by insulin resistance. And then we talked about the viscosity and how high glucose levels will need high insulin levels to respond to it in order to get it down. And another thing you should know about that is that if you're insulin resistant, meaning that you have insulin is having a problem or insulin is not able to efficiently put the glucose where it needs to go because the cells are already at max capacity, well, that's also going to cause you to increase the viscosity of your blood, and that thicker blood will need more pressure in order to push it through your circulatory system. Like I said, we're talking about 60,000 miles of blood vessel, 60,000 miles. And so it's very important that your body has what it takes in order to adapt to that increase in viscosity and also to adapt to the decrease in the diameter and to also adapt to the decrease of nitric oxide. And so that blood pressure, when you look at it from that way, your blood pressure increasing is actually life-saving. And I know they call high blood pressure the silent killer. But when you look at it from a physiological standpoint, when you look at it from the lens of APR, which is appropriate physiological response, when you look at it through that lens, which is really the only lens to look at it through, you can now appreciate your body's ability to increase the pressure given the stimuli. And so what do you want your body to do if the blood is thicker and it's having a hard time pushing the blood around the body with a blood pressure of 120/70? What do you want the body to do in a situation where the diameter of the blood vessels have dramatically decreased, and the blood pressure of 120/70 is not sufficient to get the blood to your trillions of cells? You have trillions of cells. You have 100 trillion cells. They all need blood flow. They all need what the blood has in it, which is nutrients and oxygen. And they all need to use the blood to get rid of the waste. And the body cannot afford to be without the blood really for any amount of time. But especially when we're talking about seconds to minutes, you're talking about cell death. And so even with the blood flow or the blood vessels being narrow or smaller, the body still has to adapt and get the blood to where it needs to go by any means necessary. And that's why your blood pressure increasing is so crucial in order to get the job done. Your job as the conscious individual is to recognize what is going on. High blood pressure is not a disease. High blood pressure, or your blood pressure in general, should be used as a diagnostic tool to peek inside of your cardiovascular system, to peek inside your circulatory system. it should be seen as something that kind of gives you an idea of the health of your circulatory system. If your blood pressure is high, you should not be asking the question of what should I take to get my blood pressure down. That is a lower quality question that the healthcare system has taught you to ask. A higher quality question would not be, what do I need to take to get my blood pressure down? A high quality question would be, what is my blood pressure responding to? The first question completely ignores that your body increased the blood pressure on purpose. It completely ignores that. It makes it seem like your body's just making a crazy mistake that it has no control over, and you now need to step in to correct that mistake that your body's making. That's what the question of what do I need to take? That's what that represents. However, when you ask the question of what is my blood pressure responding to, that question acknowledged the intelligence that is working. It acknowledged that there's so much going on in the body. It acknowledged the fact that there's 60,000 miles of blood vessel in your body. It acknowledged the fact that you have an endothelium that's constantly monitoring your circulatory system. It acknowledged the fact that your body will adapt to the environment given the stimulus. It acknowledged the fact that your body is increasing the blood pressure on purpose. And so our job in this whole blood pressure thing is to ask the question of what is my body responding to? And if you think about what I just went through with insulin resistance, then you should be able to understand that anything that puts you in a hyperinsulin state is most likely going to be increasing your blood pressure. So you need to ask the question, what increases insulin? And the first thing you need to do in order to decrease insulin or understand what's increasing insulin is, one, you need to stop playing. You got to get serious. You should have this book called Done with Diabetes. Now, yes, the title of the book is called Done with Diabetes, 5 Simple Strategies to Prevent Diabetes, Reverse Diabetes in 90 Days. However, this is really a book on insulin resistance and what it is and what you need to do to reverse it. I give you step-by-step recommendations on what you need to do to reverse that. But you need to understand that insulin resistance is the platform that diabetes is sitting on. Diabetes is just one of the conditions that insulin resistance is nurturing. But there's other conditions such as high blood pressure, gynecomastia, polycystic ovarian syndrome, PCOS, erectile dysfunction. Yes, men, erectile dysfunction is largely caused by insulin resistance. Obesity, and so many other states are being caused by insulin resistance. And so if you understand what insulin resistance is, then you can understand what you need to do to reverse it and or prevent it. The next step you need to do in order to reverse insulin resistance and get yourself out of this whole situation is watch the video that I did called Insulin Resistance Explained. This is a free video on my YouTube channel that goes through and clearly details and explain what insulin resistance is, how you became insulin resistant, why insulin resistance is such a problem, not such a problem, but how it being activated over time will cause multiple problems. But insulin resistance itself is not really causing the problem. The truth of the matter is that you're causing the problem by ignoring it, but you don't know. And so that video is going to explain to you what's really going on. But also the video is going to explain to you what you need to do in order to prevent and or reverse insulin resistance. So very important video. Go watch that video. That video explains everything. It's on YouTube. It's completely free. All right. All right, family. That wraps up this video. I really hope that I was able to provide value to you as far as explaining high blood pressure and insulin resistance and how insulin resistance is most likely what's causing your blood pressure to go up. Please make sure you share this video with your family and friends and anyone who could benefit from it. Also, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and like I said, be sure to get your copy of my new book called Done with Diabetes, 5 Simple Strategies to Reverse Diabetes, Get Off Medications, and Avoid Complications in 90 Days. Also, we have a program, a step-by-step do-it-yourself program called Done with Diabetes 6-Point Action Plan. And if you want to get a free resource, be sure to click the link below to check out my diabetic toolkit. All right. So I appreciate you all. Please be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the video, and I will holler at you all later. And remember, this is our community, our responsibility. We have what it takes. We just got to put in the work. All right. Love y'all. Peace.